Everyone's been talking about the brand new Zootopia 2 trailer, but one moment in particular has the entire Disney fanbase spiraling into theories, and that's the reveal of Gary D. Snake. Not only do we finally get our first look at a reptile character in the Zootopia films, but the trailer makes it very clear that snakes, and maybe even reptiles as a whole, are not welcome in the city of Zootopia. So, why is Gary there? And more importantly, why is he yelling, "I'm sorry, I have to help my family," while stealing a mysterious book? That single moment sets up the central mystery of the film, and it naturally leads us to consider a few possibilities about Gary's true motives and what he's risking everything for in Zootopia. The trailer wastes no time setting the tone, and here's what it shows us. Nick Wilde literally says in one scene, "Snakes haven't set foot in Zootopia in forever," which is already a huge lore drop. That one line tells us two things. First, it tells us that snakes used to live in Zootopia, but something happened that pushed them out, creating a deep rift between reptiles and the city's residents. This absence isn't just background detail, it's a sign that the world of Zootopia has unresolved history, and Gary's sudden arrival is about to force that history back into the spotlight. And the second thing it also suggests is that this absence may point to a deeper policy or ban, an unspoken law, or even some kind of official action that keeps reptiles away. We can infer this from the way the police chief is so adamant that Judy and Nick solve this case, warning them that if they fail, he will separate them as partners. In other words, snakes once had a place in the city, but now they've been pushed out both socially and politically, and Gary's arrival is reopening that wound. On top of that, we see the chaotic scene where Gary D. Snake slithers out of a bag on stage, and the crowd immediately starts screaming, "Snake!" Panic spreads across the room like wildfire. It's pretty clear here that the stigma around snakes is evident. Gary isn't just a surprise cameo. He stands as a symbol for an entire group of animals that Zootopia has excluded. The trailer makes it clear that his presence is viewed as dangerous, not because of who he is, but because of what he represents. So, why is Gary risking it all to come into a city that clearly doesn't want him there? The trailer gives us one big clue: him slithering away with a book in his mouth, shouting, "I'm sorry, I have to help my family." And that's where the theories begin. The first theory, and honestly the most likely explanation, is that Gary's family is sick. And here's why this makes sense. In the trailer, we see Gary carrying a book. Not money, not food, not treasure, but a book. And he's frantic about it. He's not gloating like a thief. He's desperate. He probably wouldn't risk everything for a dusty piece of paper, unless that book contained something that could save his family. So what would make this book so valuable to him? Well, for this theory, it's possible that the book holds some sort of cure for whatever illness his family may have. Maybe medical research, notes from scientists, or even forgotten remedies that could point him toward a cure. Plus, Disney loves to use objects as symbols of hope, and in this case, the book could literally represent life-saving knowledge. Maybe Gary uncovered whispers that Zootopia once experimented with reptile medicine, or even on reptiles themselves, and the only remaining record is tucked away in its archives. We already know from the first movie that Mayor Bellwether orchestrated the attacks by making predators savage with night howlers. It isn't that far of a stretch to say something similar happened, or was still happening, in Zootopia. And then there's that little detail from his crime folder shown briefly in the trailer as well. If you freeze frame it, you'll see a bag with some of Gary's shed skin listed as evidence. Now, shedding skin is normal for snakes, but Disney doesn't include details like this by accident. What if his skin shedding isn't healthy? In fact, the skin doesn't look dried up and brown like a natural shed would. It's the same color as Gary himself, which could indicate some kind of sickness or abnormality. That choice in animation could be a deliberate hint that he and possibly his family are suffering from something serious, maybe even a disease spreading among reptiles. If this theory is true, Gary isn't the villain of the story. He's a tragic hero, a snake willing to risk his life and freedom in a city that hates him, all for the chance to save his family. Now, after considering that first idea of sickness, there's another angle to consider. What if Gary's family isn't ill at all, but facing a much more immediate threat? This second theory suggests that instead of battling disease or emotional turmoil, his loved ones are in very real physical danger. Gary's family isn't sick, they're in danger. And the reasoning behind this claim comes from several visual and narrative clues sprinkled throughout the trailer. Here's the evidence. The book he's carrying could just as easily be a map. Think about it. Zootopia is the most advanced city in the animal world, with records, maps, and maybe even secret knowledge of safe havens. If Gary's family was being hunted, whether by predators in the wild or even by other reptiles, he might be searching for a safe place to take them. We also need to consider the symbolism here. In nature, snakes are often both predator and prey. And if Zootopia world follows that logic, it's possible that Gary's family is being driven out of their natural habitat, hunted, or targeted. That would explain why he's desperate enough to risk exposure in the city. If that's the case, the book could be the history of Zootopia, a clue to a sanctuary, or even the location of an underground community where reptiles still secretly live. It might even hold records of places that once provided refuge to excluded species, a kind of hidden history that Gary is desperate to uncover. This interpretation would make sense of why the book is so heavily featured in the trailer, because it represents not just survival, but a roadmap to safety. It also adds weight to his frantic behavior. He's so frantic not because he's being chased by Judy. Time is of the essence since his family is under a physical threat. He may be desperate to get back to them before they're targeted further. And if that idea feels a little too far-fetched, there's still another explanation worth considering, one that shifts the focus from danger to survival itself, leading us into the third theory, which is probably the least likely of the three, but still worth considering as it offers another angle on Gary's desperation, the idea that his family is starving. The book could contain information on agriculture, food distribution, or even a list of surplus supplies. Zootopia is a city where prey and predator coexist, so its food system is probably the most advanced in the world. For an excluded group like snakes, who may not have access to stable food sources, this knowledge could be a lifeline. There's also the possibility that reptiles were banned from Zootopia because of food conflicts. Maybe their diets clashed with the city's rules, or perhaps there was an incident in the past that forced them out, leaving them to struggle for survival outside the city walls. If that's the case, Gary might be trying to secure a safe food source for his family, risking everything to ensure they don't starve. And when you think about it, this theory makes sense of his desperation. If his family is already hungry, time isn't on his side. The urgency to provide could explain why he goes into Zootopia despite the danger, because every moment wasted means his family grows weaker. It's a quieter, less flashy motivation than disease or direct danger, but one that still carries heavy emotional weight. Now again, this theory doesn't have as much direct evidence as the first two, but in Disney storytelling, desperation over hunger is a recurring theme. Just think of Aladdin stealing bread in Agrabah, or the hyenas constantly complaining about food in The Lion King. It's not impossible that Gary is facing the same struggle. So what do these three theories have in common? Whether Gary's family is sick, in danger, or starving, the through line is the same. Gary the Snake isn't a villain. He's a desperate character forced into Zootopia for the sake of his loved ones. And that's what makes his story so compelling. Disney has always been great at blurring the line between hero and villain, and Gary might be the perfect example of that in Zootopia 2. His motives aren't rooted in malice but in love and desperation, which makes his actions more tragic than threatening. By framing him this way, the film may invite us to sympathize with a character we're initially told to fear, deepening the emotional impact of his story. And not only that, but his very presence highlights a dark truth about Zootopia. For all its talk of inclusivity, some species are still excluded. Gary's mission, whatever the real reason turns out to be, will force Judy, Nick, and maybe even the entire city to confront that uncomfortable reality. In many ways, Gary's story shines a spotlight on the cracks in Zootopia's perfect image, showing that beneath the surface, old prejudices and hidden fears still shape the city's future. But what do you think? Is Gary's family sick, in danger, or starving? Or is there an even bigger twist we haven't seen yet? Let me know what you think in the comments below.